Denver Broncos should be receiving several key players back ahead of Monday Night Football against the Los Angeles Chargers. How will the Broncos defense be boosted by the potential return of Justin Simmons? Not to mention, can Greg Dulcich help get the offense going? You get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for tuning in and making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day. Every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast, or whether you're watching on YouTube. Do us a favor, if you have not done so already, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage every single day, all year long, from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody, Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre, Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com. As the Broncos get a little bit deeper into this week, their preparation, their mindset shifts from, recovering from Thursday night's loss to focusing on Monday Night Football, another primetime game against the Los Angeles Chargers. And there's so many different things that we can go into in this matchup that we'll preview a little bit later on this week. But, Sarah, just the prospects of several key players potentially returning this week, I think has everybody in Broncos country excited.
They do, and absolutely they should be, right? Because it's been one injury after another taking players out of the lineup. Now you're getting a few key players back, Cody. But before we talk about the guys returning, I think we just have to have a quick just moment here, because this could be the very last podcast with this, Dexter-like background that I have going on here. I'm moving into my new house, moving out of my brother's. It's been a good backdrop. We've got lots of questions. It's been a great conversation starter for some of the crossover people that we've been able to talk to. So yeah, you don't know what else is going on around here. I got a Christmas tree over here. We got other monitors and other, things packed up over here. You can't see it. You get this cool little backdrop right here one last time, Broncos country. So I'm riding out of this situation, and I'm going to be setting up a new podcast setup. So I'm excited for that, but I'm way more excited, Cody, about the guy that you're representing right now on your t-shirt there, Justin Simmons, one of our favorite Denver Broncos players, just an absolute star in the NFL, the best safety in the NFL. He's been out the last 4 weeks, which of course has been abnormal for Broncos country, right? Because he's played every game for like the last 6 years or something like that. So he's been an Iron Man for the Broncos. To see him get injured and have to go on IR, I'm sure has been brutal for him, but he's kind of been front and center on the camera on a lot of those shots of the sideline. He's over there cheering players on, doing a little coaching from the sideline, I'm sure. But Justin Simmons getting back onto the field is going to be huge for a secondary that has already been playing out of its mind lately.
It should be a really big boost. And I know we've talked about it on a previous episode a few days ago. Really, how does his return impact maybe Caden Stern's role? I know that's something we dived into. You want to hear that? Go check out the last episode, Locked on Broncos, where we focus on the defensive side of the ball and how they've been overshadowed by the offensive struggles. But, obviously going back for Simmons, he suffered that quad injury week 1 against the Seattle Seahawks in the first quarter. He played the remainder of the game through it, and we had no inclination that he was even hurt in the post game. And we just found out, oddly enough, was that day after the Seahawks game from Nathaniel Hackett, and we're like, wait, what? Like, what the heck? And that was a big question mark. Like, how are the Broncos going to navigate defensively without, at the time, he and Josie Jewell? And you know what? The defense has done a pretty good job, and a lot of that's Caden Stearns, Alex Singleton, those guys stepping up here. He is eligible to return for the Chargers. Now, once the move becomes official, once the Broncos elevate him off of injured reserve, we'll do another episode, Locked on Broncos, a bonus episode talking about that. But it also adds another star player to the secondary after you already lose a guy like Ronald Darby. And I think the return of Justin Simmons can boost and provide confidence with a guy like Damari Mathis, who's going to have to step up at cornerback now with Darby's injury opposite of Patrick Surtain.
He is. He's going to have to step up big time, and having that guy that can communicate at the back end like Justin Simmons, who can help you get into the right position, that could be a huge help for Damari Mathis. It obviously has worked out well for other guys that have played the cornerback position, along with Simmons being behind them at safety. So certainly you want to see Damari Mathis, especially in this next stretch of games, as the Broncos look to get back on track. They're 2-3 right now, And with Ronald Darby out of the lineup, you're going to need somebody like Damari Mathis to step up, because it wasn't like teams were just out there testing Ronald Darby every single time they went and threw the ball, right? I mean, Patrick Surtain has been tested plenty this season. K'Wan Williams has been able to make some really, really nice plays out of the slot. He had a really great play also against the Colts. I think a lot of these things get kind of underrated because obviously the Broncos lost the game and everybody's upset about the offense. But, man, he had that one play late where he broke up a pass over the middle. That was great to see. But Damari Mathis, Cody, is going to benefit tremendously, in my opinion, from Justin Simmons, because what's the real strength of Damari Mathis's game, at least that we can tell early on? In my opinion, it's aggressiveness. And when he plays aggressive, when he plays kind of not loose in terms of he's being reckless, but when he plays loose and just he's out there playing ball, you can tell that that's when he's at his best. If he knows he has somebody like Justin Simmons over the top as sort of a safety blanket, I think he can play his game better, and I think that he can really excel with Ronald Darby on IR.
And I think that he really jumped in and kind of accelerated that, right? Because when you have to get thrust into the game at just a short moment's notice, I mean, there's a quick sideline play and the bam, he was in. He had to go in there. He did a really good job of just kind of getting his feet wet and really kind of playing into the scheme, sinking in, settling in there a little bit. That was huge there. And Justin Simmons, how he commands the presence on the back end and how he gets guys aligned and communicates. I mean, it has the Broncos defense flowing very, very well. And I think it only gets better with Simmons' return there on the back end. We talk about personnel groupings as well. Caden Stearns, we talk about coming off of a big-time performance, more than likely transitions back into that dime role. We could see him, especially as the Broncos play some of these teams like the Chargers, who have some pass-catching options with, obviously, Josh Palmer. You have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. Denver's going to really have to account for Austin Eckler out of the backfield this week as well. How can P.J. Locke and Caden Stearns also play a little bit of a role here this upcoming week against the Los Angeles Chargers? That is going to be a very, very big question. We highlighted it as well, what we've seen Ejiro Evero do with the edge rushers and putting Baron Browning, Bradley Chubb on the same side. And when Randy Gregory was healthy, having Baron Browning, Bradley Chubb, Randy Gregory, Draymond Jones on the field at the same exact time. I mean, that right there is beautiful. Chef's kiss here. When we talk about defensive schematics and how they've dialed up pressure, I think it'll be very interesting as well to see how it kind of plays out with the secondary. But the return of Justin Simmons is huge for the Denver Broncos defense. And Broncos country, tell us how you're feeling down below about the optics of Justin Simmons returning on Monday Night Football against Justin Herbert and the Los Angeles Chargers. That's something that is insightful. We look forward to your interaction down below in the YouTube comment section as well. But coming up here in just a moment, can tight end Greg Dulcich, if he's activated off of injured reserve this week, how can he help the Broncos offense, and can he give them something they don't have? We'll dive into that coming up here in just a moment. But now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. And it can be tough to train your brain to stay in problem-solving mode when faced with a challenge in life, but when you learn how to find your own solutions, there is no better feeling, and a therapist can help you become a better problem solver, making it easier to accomplish your goals no matter how big or how small. I've been using BetterHelp for the last 3 months, and I tell you what, I check in with my therapist every single week. We work on problem-solving action items. We address how to deal with stress, anxiety, especially with the busyness of me being on the road all the time and just constantly come and go with my line being in sports media. It is very taxing on the mental, and BetterHelp has helped me create some solutions to help make my life a little bit easier. And if you're thinking of giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option. It's convenient, accessible, affordable, and entirely online. You get matched with a therapist after filling out a brief survey, and you can switch therapists anytime to find the right fit for yourself. And when you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's better, HELP.com/lockedon. The Broncos offense has gone through their fair share of ups and downs this season. The tight end position has been very interesting early on through the first 5 weeks of the NFL season. Could Greg Dulcich add a little bit of a wrinkle to the Broncos offense? Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day on your favorite audio podcasting platform, or whether you watch on YouTube. Sayre and I, we appreciate you so much. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country. Sayre, I mean, the Broncos offense, as much as we've spent on this podcast since week one, talking about these struggles, just the disappointment that the offense has been, how inconsistent it's been, could there be a potential addition here with Greg Dulcich, who could be eligible to come off of injured reserve? They could activate his 21-day window, where then they have the opportunity to elevate him to the active roster. There's going to have to be a multitude of corresponding roster moves in order to bring guys like Justin Simmons and Greg Dulcich and another guy that we'll talk about a little bit later, Michael Ojemudia, off of injured reserve. But we'll get to that when that comes there. Can Dulcich maybe add a little bit of a wrinkle to this offense that hasn't been there? Because the guy that we thought as tight end one coming into the season has kind of been phased out of the offense a little bit. We haven't seen a lot of Albert Okwuegbunam. We've seen a little bit more of Eric Saubert.
That's right. And I think that's kind of been a surprise to everyone, especially the dedicated and devoted fantasy football players, right? Because they've all been banking on Albert O really being that breakout player for this Denver Broncos offense. But we haven't really seen that from anybody. Like you said, Eric Saubert has probably been the closest thing to a tight end one for the Denver Broncos so far this season. And we talked about this in training camp in the early days, like, could he be seizing that? Because, I mean, he is arguably the best all-around player at the position. And even with Greg Dulcich coming back, I think that remains true. Dulcich not necessarily known for his blocking, which part of me wonders, is that the reason why Albert Okwuegbunam is in the doghouse seemingly, right? Because he has been kind of getting phased out of the offensive game plan. And if blocking is a big reason for that, what does that mean for Greg Dulcich? But I think also too, Cody, the big issue that I have with Okwuegbunam is he really that sure-handed target that Russell Wilson can rely on? Because we've seen some drops from him since he came into the league, right? That was kind of a problem with him in his rookie season, and then he got injured, and then, it's stayed a problem. So does Greg Dulcich come in and bring you a sure-handed target in the passing game? Because he brings everything else that Albert O does in terms of, well, he can make plays after the catch. He can make plays in the red zone. He could be a threat, over the middle of the field. He could be a threat at the sideline. There were some comparisons to Travis Kelce being thrown around at the time he was drafted. And of course, it would take a long time for him to get to that status. But at the same time, could you see some sort of impact in the passing game in that way? Because what did we talk about with Greg Dulcich that he was so good at UCLA that we thought, man, in the Broncos offense, this would be so exciting. He's that guy that your opposing team is always wondering, and the fans are always just absolutely scolding the defense on Twitter for saying, why is Greg Dulcich always wide open? That's exactly what I want people to be saying about him when we play against, even up against the Chargers this week, if Dulcich can play for that game, and then going forward against the Jets and the Jaguars. And I want every fan base to be wondering on Twitter, why is Greg Dulcich always wide open? That's what we want to see, because Dulcich is going to be that guy that I think can be the outlet that this offense needs, Cody, because the Broncos have been desperately missing that, haven't they? I mean, a consistent presence in the passing game at the tight end position. That's a lot to expect of him, I think, coming off this injury. Like, what has it been since June that he's been dealing with this? So it's been a long time, like 4 months that he's been dealing with this hamstring. But can the Broncos expect a lot out of him if they say, just like we talk about with Billy Turner, if he's fully healthy, can you expect to get the best version of him? I think that's the biggest question mark for me right now.
Well, and to that point there, I mean, how much of the offense has he picked up, right? Because I think for him, like, he's in the offensive meetings. He is in the position meetings every single week. He knows the playbook by studying it. But I mean, we talk about the physical side of carrying over what you know about the playbook, the plays, the concepts, how to adjust versus, if you're a tight end, let's say you're lined up in line and you have to block and chip this guy and run your route. Does he know, can he do that? Can he process that mental side and carry it over to the physical? That'll probably be the first test that Broncos coaches are looking forward to seeing. Maybe can he do those things? And if he can't do those right away, like, I imagine we probably won't see much of him at this point because the offense is struggling. I imagine there could be a ramp-up period. But let's speak on the hypothetical here. Let's say that he comes in through practice, after activated, whenever that may be, and decide like he's carrying it over on the physical side. There's things that we've seen from him, and it dates back to OTAs as well, Sayre. All the reports about what he was able to do, how open he was finding himself getting, and even like on the one time where I saw him in practice actually participate in training camp in the red zone period, he did a great job when he was covered initially by a defender, sidestepping him and getting open, and Russell Wilson found him in the end zone for a touchdown during the Broncos red zone period. I mean, there's things I think he can do to help that, right? But right now, this tight end position room is just so very interesting, right? Because here's the interesting thing. You go back to Albert Okwuegbunam, and I think the statistics, the metrics kind of speak volumes here. I believe that it was charted that for a guy like Albert Okwuegbunam, he has only been in on 2 run plays this season. He's been in on 45 passing plays. So when the Broncos are going to run, it's not when Albert Okwuegbunam is on the field. And I think, tight end coach Jake Moreland is going to have a big question. How do you do that to where maybe some of these personnel groupings aren't giving away what you're trying to do on the offensive side of the ball? That's going to be on the position coaches. It's going to be on Nathaniel Hackett to do just that. Can Dulcich come in and maybe change that type of perception? I think that's a question that remains to be seen.
It is absolutely, Cody. And I think that you make some great points there. And it's going to be it's one of those things where I think fans are going to have certain expectations for this guy, based on what we've heard about him throughout OTAs and training camp, that can he meet or even exceed those expectations? Or if he fails to live up to it, is it going to be more fodder to the fire of, well, George Payton should have drafted such and such instead of Greg Dulcich when this guy was available? And I mean, it's one of those things where you really want to see something come through for the Denver Broncos here, right? You want to see a guy like Dulcich who had those high expectations. Daniel Jeremiah had him as the number 1 tight end in this draft class. You want to see him come in and live up to those expectations, although fairly lofty at this point, because the Broncos are looking for a savior offensively. Everybody has expected it to be Russell Wilson. You can't put that pressure on Greg Dulcich to come in and be, racking up 150 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns immediately. But if he can come in and help move the chains on 3rd down, maybe help your red zone efficiency, I think you're definitely going to see a lot of Broncos fans kind of start getting back on board this bandwagon, which is kind of desperately needed right now, right? We can't be having people leave the game before overtime even starts anymore. Broncos country, let's go. But I think that, Dulcich is one of those guys that we talked about after the Tim Patrick injury. Man, he's going to have to step up in a big way. And we haven't seen the Broncos really appropriately fill the void left behind by Tim Patrick. Again, these are big shoes to be having to fill in terms of looking for a savior for the offense, somebody to fill the shoes of Tim Patrick. Like we can't be putting all of that on Greg Dulcich right now, but at the same time, you do expect to see some great things from him coming in if he's fully healthy, right? We've been waiting a long time for this debut, and the Broncos did, kind of maneuver around to be able to get him. We saw how excited they were in the draft room, and Nathaniel Hackett said he gives our offense something that we didn't have before. Well, let's find out what that looks like and what that exactly is.
I think you make some great points, and I think the thing I really wanted to touch on most, right, is the expectation factor, because it seems like as passionate as Broncos country is, they have unbelievably high expectations, unreasonable at times. And I'm glad that you mentioned it could take some time for Dulcich to get things going, because he's not going to come in right away and be a savior that's going to change the Broncos offense completely. If he does, it's like a unicorn moment. You're thankful for it, and you're like, hey, we have to appreciate it. Like, he's really done a good job. But the expectation is it could take some time, and I think that's a fair point to make. And also, the one thing I also want to point out, too, just like you mentioned the fans leaving before overtime, whatever happened to just sitting in the stands, regardless how frustrating it is, whether you watch a team win or lose, the Broncos have been in a very good position in comparison to many fan bases that have never even had a Super Bowl ring. Denver's had more Super Bowl rings than some teams have had in their entire existence as an organization. Whatever happened to cheering for your team, whether you win or whether you lose? We're seeing a lot of comments here on YouTube and the podcast. So the season's over. Well, if that's the case, if the Broncos win a big game or they go on a winning streak, don't come back and say like, oh, I'm so excited the Broncos are winning games. Stick with the team, win or loss. That's what being a fan truly is, Broncos country. And hopefully we see that change a little bit from what we've been seeing in the comment section on YouTube. It's been nuts to see. But Broncos country coming up here in just a moment. We talked about the potential return of Justin Simmons. How might the potential return of Michael Ojemudia impact the Broncos on special teams and the defensive side of the ball? We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth articles, and analysis on every game that you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. They're the fastest and the easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. So head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more today. BetOnline, where the game starts. The Broncos could see a boost in the secondary despite Ronald Darby's torn ACL that's put him on injured reserve for the rest of the season. The Broncos could be getting a cornerback back in Michael Ojemudia. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day on your favorite audio podcasting platform, or whether you watch on YouTube. Sayre and I, we appreciate you so much. Do us a favor, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, go ahead. If you love Locked On Broncos, please go there and write us a review. Leave us 5 stars if you love the show. Tell us why you tune in every single day. And don't forget to drop your Twitter handle in that bio as well, so we can thank you and also enter you into any future contest giveaway that we do here on Locked On Broncos, especially as we get closer to 8K subscribers on YouTube. We appreciate you so much there. Sayre, let's talk about Michael Ojemudia. Now, this is a guy that, kind of has gone through some ups and downs throughout training camp and in the preseason. And in training camp, he had a prominent role with the Broncos offense with Ronald Darby. Patrick Surtain, the way that he was playing, allowed Denver and Ejiro Evero to get very creative. We saw him have some good moments in the preseason, and then against the Buffalo Bills, we saw him just have a really rough game, in run support. We saw him have a rough game in coverage going against, we talk about Gabriel Davis and what type of season he's having right now for the Bills. Unbelievable. And even Stephon Diggs at that point. And he got hurt. He hyperextended his elbow and had a dislocated elbow. He is set to make his return. He's been grinding, coming back, and I've had a chance to speak with him several times in the locker room. He's just said, hey, I'm eager to get out back on the field and show people what I can do. And this is a big year for Michael Ojemudia to have to do just that. He could return. How does a potential Ojemudia return, Sayre, help impact the Broncos' secondary?
Well, I think it's great timing, first of all, right, with obviously Ronald Darby going down with that torn ACL, gives you some more depth at the position at the very least. And hopefully we've seen Darius Phillips, who's as of right now, he's still on the roster. We'll see kind of after all the roster reshuffling, whether it's him still on the roster or he's saying Bassie. But for the time being, the Broncos have some necessary depth at that outside cornerback position with Ojemudia coming off IR right as Ronald Darby goes on it, right? So it's kind of just fortuitous timing in that regard. But like we talked about, he was kind of having a strong OTAs for sure. He was one of the guys that people were talking about daily, just like, man, Michael Ojemudia looks really good out there. Then kind of had the up and down training camp before getting torched a little bit in the preseason. And I think that that's kind of where the taste in fans' mouth is right now is, oh man, like I just, can you trust Michael Ojemudia out there right now in a significant role? That's where everybody's at. And that's not just to do with his play on the field, right? It's obviously he's gotten hurt a couple of times in the last 2 seasons. He had the injury last year in the preseason against Seattle that looked kind of scary and kept him out until the final couple games of the season. But then he goes out and plays really well against Kansas City, which kind of, leaves people thinking, man, there might be something there still in terms of his ability to start or play a key role. And then we see what he did in the preseason, where everybody's now back on the, a little hesitant on him, or maybe even out completely. So I think at the very least, Cody, he gives you some nice depth at that position. He's got great size, but I think that there's some ways that they could try to find, to use him. Ejiro Evero, we've been talking about creativity with guys like Caden Stearns, PJ Locke at the safety position. Could he get a little creative with Michael Ojemudia coming back and utilizing his skill set a little bit better than just maybe as an emergency outside corner?
I think that's a great point. I'll be very intrigued to see what, Ejiro Evero does, how Christian Parker kind of utilizes that rotation, because really we haven't seen anything from Darius Phillips. He came in, he was signed, and then he suffered a hamstring injury that has held him out of action, has held him on the inactive game day list for the last couple of weeks. Will we see anything from him? I mean, when we talk about scheme familiarity, I feel like a lot of the times Darius Phillips was signed because of Michael Ojemudia's injury, which, kind of does make sense there. But what are the Broncos going to do? Are they going to release a guy like Darius Phillips, or are they going to release a guy like a Sayre Bassie, who has been playing really well on special teams for the Broncos? I mean, this is tough. This is like the roster gymnastics that have to go on in order to bring guys back is going to be very, very interesting this week for this Denver Broncos football team. Is Sayre, my friend. I can't wait to break it all down with you the rest of the way. I know Sayre is getting ready to move into his brand new house. We'll have a crossover episode with the Locked On Chargers guys on Thursday's episode of the show, so we could break down all the action, preview the biggest stories for each team, the key matchups, and how the Broncos can win on Monday Night Football. Despite Broncos country not having a lot of faith in the Denver Broncos, we'll break it down from an objective angle on every single side of the coin. You get that here on the Locked On Broncos podcast.